This is part 2 of the video that discusses how skeletal muscle is assembled and how it contracts. We left off looking at the sliding filament theory in the first part of this video and how calcium interacts with troponin to move tropomyosin out of the way on actin, which reveals these myosin binding sites, which then can then lead to the formation of these cross bridges. It's the cross bridge itself that needs to occur in order for a contraction to happen. So picking up from this point, we're going to be integrating the nervous system now, specifically motor neurons. Neurons are also known as nerves, and ones that connect to muscle are known as motor neurons. This would be because, like motors, these neurons cause things to move, namely the skeletal muscle. So they are appropriately called motor neurons. A motor neuron will connect in some way, shape, or form to the brain. It will go through the spinal cord first, obviously, but then it also will connect to different muscle cells, forming synapses. Now, as we can see in this picture right here, a little small, I know, we can see that one neuron is actually coming into contact with several different locations within a muscle. So it's contacting different muscle fibers. This one neuron and every single muscle fiber, they contract together and are collectively known as a motor unit. So unit because they are working together. If this one neuron is stimulated, then this section of muscle, that section of muscle, and that section of muscle will also be stimulated, and they will all contract. So it is called a motor unit. What we're going to be looking at on the next slide here is the image that I drew on the whiteboard in front of class. But what we see is a neuron that kind of goes down, and then we have the end of the neuron. What I'd like you to know is that the end of the neuron is called the axon terminal, and it does not actually touch the muscle. As we can see right here, there is a gap. The connection between the neuron and the muscle would form what is known as a synapse. So let's check out the image I drew on the board and go through how this thing is assembled and how it works. So looking in this image, here we see the motor neuron. The end of the motor neuron is known as the axon terminal. At the axon terminal, we find little containers known as synaptic vesicles. Inside these containers are these little dots. In this case, they are neurotransmitters, specifically acetylcholine, which we abbreviate ACH. Once again, at a synapse, which is where a neuron meets something else, the neuron does not actually touch that something else. So we see the sarcolemma, the cell membrane of this muscle right here, and we do see that there's a space between them. That space is called the synaptic cleft. On the surface of the cell membrane, or the surface of the sarcolemma, there will be receptors. In the case of a synapse with a muscle cell, the name of that receptor is a sodium-potassium pump. Also on the surface of the sarcolemma, or the cell membrane, are little doorways. These doorways are called T-tubules. Doorways, as doors do, they allow things to enter a cell. Once inside the cell, we have this structure here, the sarcoplasmic reticulum, and inside of the sarcoplasmic reticulum is calcium. Also inside the cell are these sarcomeres, once again beginning at a Z line, ending at a Z line, and containing our two proteins, actin, and it is not labeled, but the thicker one here, myosin. So let's take a look at how this sarcomere contracts following that sliding filament theory. It starts with the muscle impulse, also known as a nerve impulse. It travels down the axon, down the motor neuron, I should say, and it is electricity. When the electricity or impulse reaches the axon terminal, It strikes the synaptic vesicles, which are the containers, and that causes the acetylcholine, or ACH, to be released. Once released, the acetylcholine leaves the axon terminal, goes across this space here, the synaptic cleft, and it sticks to the receptor, the sodium-potassium pump. Notice that the impulse stopped at the synaptic vesicle, and we have a neurotransmitter relaying that message to the receptor. What happens at this receptor is we have sodium outside the cell and potassium inside the cell. The pump pumps potassium out and it pumps sodium in. This reversal of these two ions generates a new impulse. That impulse travels across the sarcolemma in both directions. It's looking for a door. Here is a door, the T-tubule. Now it has a way to get into the muscle. So it goes down into the muscle. The impulse strikes the sarcoplasmic reticulum. When the sarcoplasmic reticulum is struck, calcium is released, and calcium is released into the sarcomere. Once again, as we saw right here, it's looking for troponin. So the calcium would stick to the troponin. That would cause tropomyosin to move out of the way. It would reveal the binding sites on actin, and that would allow the myosin to grab onto the actin, causing the actin to slide this way and slide that way. In essence, that would cause this contraction here that we spoke of previously to occur. In the handout you have, you're asked a series of questions on the back page. I'm looking for your summary of this process of a muscular contraction. Hopefully this video helps. Please let me know if you have questions that come up.